Hello and welcome. My name is Sarah Rowland with Contractor Compliance, and today we're going to be talking about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, also known as the FFCRA. I will refer to it simply as the Act for the duration of our training. Let's go ahead and go over the disclaimer before we get started. It states information presented is not intended to be misconstrued as legal or accounting advice. It should not substitute for legal, accounting, and other professional advice where required. Here's our outline. We're going to go ahead and review the history, do a little bit of an overview, then we'll talk about who is covered by the Act, reasons for leave, the amount of paid leave that can be taken, how much to pay, additional considerations, documentation, non-compliance issues, tax credits, and then some resource links. Here we have a little bit of background. COVID-19 was declared a pandemic in the United States on March 11, 2020. The FFCRA was signed March 18, 2020. It became effective April 1, 2020, and it will conclude December 31, 2020. So there is a sunset date for this act, which is going to be important to know as we go into the planning and how we're going to implement this into our work and our everyday environment. This is the first time that the federal government has established employer-paid leave. And that is pretty historic in itself if you think about it, because prior to, there was no requirement for an employer to provide any sort of paid leave to include sick time or PTO. Now I know that there are some states and some local regulations and laws that do have mandatory paid sick time leave or paid PTO, and we will talk about those as we continue on through the training. So a little bit of overview on the Act. It created a new emergency paid sick leave mandate for COVID-19 related absences. It expands the Family and Medical Leave Act to include paid leave to care for a son or daughter under the ages of 18 due to a school or daycare closure related to COVID-19. And then it also provides payroll tax credits for employers to cover the paid leave requirement. Leave under the FFCRA does not roll over into the next year. Leave is not payable at employment separation, no matter the cause of that separation. You do not have to calculate and pay out the leave balance. Leave is in addition, though, to any existing leave policies. That's going to include any sort of company policies on leave. So if you have paid sick leave or paid PTO, that's going to be in addition to this. And then any other legally mandated state or local leave. And we talked a little bit briefly about that, and we'll see that again later in the training. So again, it is in addition to any existing leave policies. The employee, though, may elect to use the other paid sick leave, but they are not required. So you cannot require your employee to deplete their paid sick leave or paid PTO benefits prior to taking the leave as provided under the Act. They may choose to do so. We'll talk about circumstances when they may choose to do so and how you guys can balance that and work that out within your company. But again, the employee is not required to use other resources or other leave if they choose not to. It's very important. So you cannot require, you legally cannot require them to deplete their leave balance prior to using this other leave as provided by the FFCRA. A COVID-19 FFCRA required posting is required, and that posting has been provided to you guys. Now, with us mostly teleworking, this posting can also be sent via email or regular mail to those employees who are teleworking. So you're going to want to go ahead and you're going to want to send it out to all the employees to their email, put it into one of your meetings or anything like that where everybody is aware of it and they know where to find that information. So you could put it on your website if you have a website, put it on your Facebook, again, email it out directly to those employees. You just want to make sure, though, that they have received that information and received the poster information. So a thought on that is maybe have them sign an affidavit that they have received it, or simply just replying to the email, received and understood. That way you have that backup documentation where nobody can say, well, I wasn't aware of the new policies or of my new benefits. Okay? In addition, you do want to post it, though, where you have your other postings in your main office work sites. Okay? So if you have multiple work sites, you're going to have this posted in those multiple areas, just as we do with our other work site postings. Before we discuss the details found in the FFCRA, it's important to determine if you are actually covered. Right? If you're an employer that has to provide coverage, or if you're an employee who is going to be granted coverage. Okay? As an employer, you have to provide coverage if you have less than 500 employees. That's going to be for the private employers with less than 500 employees. Now, we will discuss a little bit later in the training how to calculate those 500 employees, which will be important for those that are going to be very close to that threshold. Okay? And then we have our government employers. It's important to note that there is no minimum or maximum employees listed there, meaning that any size government employer is going to be required to provide coverage to their employees. Okay? So let's define employee. What does it mean to be an employee? Well, the definition is going to be found under the FLSA, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act. If you are defined as an employee working for a company that has less than 500 employees, then you are going to be provided coverage under the FFCRA Act. There is an additional caveat, though. You do have to meet the additional eligibility requirement as an employee, which states that you have to be unable to work, including remotely, so including telework. You're not going to be able to work, including telework, related to COVID-19 issues. And we'll talk about those issues just in a little bit as we break down the Act. There is also a little bit of an exemption in there for healthcare providers, and we'll go over that a little bit at the end of the training for those that might be interested. All right, so now we know the employers who have to provide the leave. We know the employees that can receive the leave, but let's talk about the leave in itself. Okay? There's two components here. There's two different leaves. There's the emergency paid sick leave, and then there's the emergency paid family medical leave. And the two, while very similar in regard, and within the same FFCRA Act, actually have different requirements to be met for an employee to receive that leave. So we'll go ahead and we'll focus here on the emergency paid sick leave. This is going to be for all employees who are eligible. And remember, we talked about eligibility. That's going to be, number one, they are actually an employee as defined by the FLSA. And number two, they are unable to work, including telework. Okay? So all eligible employees, no minimum service required. That's extremely important. So they do not have to have a minimum service requirement. And service requirement, I mean how long they've been with your company. So there's no, 30-day marker, 60-day marker, 90-day marker. There's none of that. They could have been employed with the company for 1 day. They're going to go ahead and be eligible for this leave if, of course, they are not able to work or telework. Okay? Continuing, it says leave can be taken if the employee is unable to work due to a COVID-19 related issue. We've already seen that, and that does again include telework. Okay? Bullet point number 1 states they are experienced symptoms of COVID-19 and, that is capitalized and underlined, seeking medical care. They are self-quarantined based off of a provider recommendation. Quarantine of isolation ordered by a federal, state, or local authority. Caring for a family member or individual who is quarantined due to COVID-19. Caring for a child under 18 whose school or care provider is closed due to COVID-19. So those are going to be the different bullet points that are going to then lead you into determining whether an employee is actually going to be covered under the emergency paid sick leave portion of the FFCRA. So that's the emergency paid sick leave portion. Now let's go ahead and focus on the emergency paid family medical leave. This is an expansion on the standard FMLA that's already in place. There are some differences though. We'll talk about those differences. The first difference is the employee only has to be employed for at least 30 days. Okay, so an employee only has to be employed for at least 30 days. Standard FMLA requires for a year or 1,250 hours. There's only one reason that an employee would be eligible to take this leave, and that would be if they are required to care for a child, son or daughter, under the age of 18 due to COVID-19 related closure of a school, daycare, or other care solutions. Okay? So if you are unable to work, or if you have an employee who's unable to work because they are taking care of a child, son or daughter, their child, son or daughter, under the age of 18, due to a COVID-19 related closure of their school, daycare, or other care solutions, then they would be eligible for the emergency paid family medical leave. Okay, very important. It's important to see the two distinctions in the two different leaves that have been mandated in the FFCRA. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and now talk about the amount of paid leave that the employees can take. So we've already determined that we have to provide the coverage because we are an employer with less than 500 employees, or we are a government employer. We've already determined that the employee is eligible, that they have been defined under the FLSA as an employee, and they are unable to work related to COVID-19. That includes, again, telework. Okay, so how much leave are they eligible to get? Again, it is broken down by the emergency paid sick leave and then also the emergency paid family leave. So we're first going to be looking at the emergency paid sick leave. As a reminder, there are no service requirements here. So they could be with the company for just one day and they're eligible to take this leave. Okay? For our full-time employees, they're going to receive up to 80 hours. That is going to be up to 2 weeks of paid leave. Okay, up to 80 hours. If they are considered a part-time employee, they will receive a prorated amount based on the average hours worked in a 2-week period. So you need to look at what do they averagely work, right? If they work 30 hours one week and 20 hours the other week, what's the average there? That's going to be 25 hours, all right? So over a 2-week period, what is the average amount that they work? And that's going to be the amount of leave that they can receive. Again, full-time employees, they receive 80 hours. That's going to be 2 weeks, or up to 2 weeks, I should say. And then part-time employees, a prorated amount based on the average that they've worked in a 2-week period. Okay? For emergency paid family medical leave, again, as a reminder, the employee has to be there for at least 30 days. So that's a little bit different than what we just discussed. So at least 30 days. And it's going to be for all employees, they have up to 12 weeks of leave, with the first 10 days being unpaid. So that's going to equivalent to the first 2 weeks of being unpaid. Okay? The remaining days, up to 12 weeks, so that's the remaining 10 weeks, it's going to be paid under the FFCRA. Okay? Let's go back to that first 10 days though. During that first 10 days of unpaid leave, they can use any accrued company leave or any other leave provided by law. You may still be paying leave, it just wouldn't be under the emergency paid family medical leave provision, because that says that they're not going to be paid under here until the third week, all right, until that third week of leave that they've taken. But for those first 2 weeks or those first 10 days, they can use any accrued leave that they have, if there's company policies and they have accrued leave, or any other leave provided by law. So again, if you have state or local governments that have, mandated that you have paid sick leave, paid PTO, whatever it is, that can be covered. Also, they could use the emergency paid sick leave. So if they haven't used that, that provides for those first 2 weeks. After determining the amount of hours that we're going to have to be paying, dependent on if they're full-time or part-time employees, we then need to determine how much to pay for that time. How much to pay is going to depend on a couple of factors. First, we'll focus on the emergency paid sick leave. Under the emergency paid sick leave, there are 2 different pay rates and 2 different caps that we're going to have to be mindful of when we go ahead and pay out this leave. This is going to be extremely important, and you'll see this later, if we choose to take the tax credits that are going to be applicable for this type of leave. So we'll review the tax credits a little bit later on in the training, but we need to be mindful of the caps and the amount of pay that we're supposed to be providing. Okay? So we already reviewed the qualifying reasons for somebody to take this paid sick leave. If one of those qualifying reasons is related to self-care, then the rate of pay is going to be their regular rate of pay. So whatever they would regularly make is what they're going to be receiving for those hours of sick paid time. And that does have a cap though, and that cap is at $511 per day, $5,110 total. And then that's easy, that's just 511 times the 10 days, right? The 2-week period gets us that 5,110 total. If the leave, though, is being taken to care for a family member or a child due to a COVID-related closure, then they will receive 2/3 of their regular rate of pay for all their normally scheduled hours. Okay? This is capped at $200 a day for a total of $2,000. So $200, total $2,000. Moving over to the emergency paid family medical leave. Again, this is only paid if they are having to care for a son or daughter under the age of 18 due to a COVID-related closure of the school, daycare, or other care services. It is at 2/3 the regular rate of pay for those normally scheduled hours, capped at $200 a day or $10,000 total. Now, nothing in the provisions prevents an employer from being more generous. You can definitely be more generous. You can provide the full rate of pay if you choose to, even though it's just directed for the 2/3 under those 2 circumstances that we talked about. You could still provide full pay if you so chose. If that was a company policy that you wanted to make, you could do that. But remember that you are limited by the provisions, by those caps, when seeking the tax credits. And so that's an important thing to remember, is you can definitely be more generous, but you're limited by the caps for those tax credits. So there is that flexibility that an employer and employee can work out together. When we're considering the approval of leave, or if we're talking to our employees about the leave that's available to them, there are some additional considerations to be made. For those that are able to telework, they are able to take that leave intermittently, okay? And at the discretion of the employer, they can also take that intermittently, but also in intervals, okay? Meaning that the employee and the employer could come up with a schedule that works for both, where the employee will be able to work for a little bit of time, take a little bit of time off, and take that leave during that time off. Okay? There's an example here. It says you and your employee may agree on a 90-minute increment. Now that 90 minutes, that's just an example. But you say you agree on a 90-minute increment. Employee teleworks from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m., takes leave from 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m., and then returns to teleworking. Now, why would you do this? Why would this even be there? Well, under the paid sick leave, one of those qualifying reasons is caring for somebody else. So maybe that employee is not sick, but they are taking care of somebody else. So maybe in their day, they're able to steal away for a couple hours to actually do some work. And maybe that's how they can take care of that. So they can take care of the individual, and then they can actually still do some work. During the time that they're taking care of the individual, they get to take that leave because they're not working. Those aren't work hours, right? You're not paying them for those hours. on the regular hours, right? And then they can come back to work. It also gives flexibility for an employer and employee to agree on a schedule. So maybe if working early in the morning works better for the employee, the employer agrees to that, that also may happen. Maybe working at night works better, that also may happen. And that flexibility is there, okay? That again is for telework. But now let's look at non-telework. This is where the employee is still required to come to the place of business, go to the shop, go to the office, go to the store, whatever it's going to be. If they are not able to telework, then leave is not to be taken intermittently. It also must be taken in full day increments. So you can't have half days or anything like that, or 90-minute increments as we saw with the telework. They must be in full day increments. You are not to do it intermittently, and the idea behind that is if you are sick, then stay home because you're sick, right? Or if you're caring for somebody who is sick, stay home because you may be sick. And we don't know if that's true or not if you're not sick. So it's not to be taken intermittently, okay? Meaning once paid sick leave starts, it must continue until 1, the full amount of leave has been used, there's 10 days, or 2, there's no longer a qualifying reason. There is a special consideration, of course, to be made when an employee is taking care of their son or daughter due to a COVID-related closure of a school or daycare. If that is the case, if that's the only reason they're taking that paid sick leave, is to care for that son or daughter so that they're not sick, they're not taking care of anybody who's sick or anything like that, then you can then work out an intermittent schedule where maybe they work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and take Tuesday, Thursday off. Or maybe it's opposite. Maybe they take Monday, Wednesday, Friday off, and they come in Tuesday, Thursday. And they work that around the available child care. And that can then be okay if they are a non-telework employee, and you could do that. Any other qualifying reason, though, would not be allowing or does not allow that intermittent taking of time. Another little side note, though, about the intermittent time, especially for our non-telework employees, is that they can, if they have leave remaining, take that leave through December 31st, 2020, if they have another qualifying reason. So the leave cannot be intermittent for the one reason. So if they take the paid sick leave because they themselves are sick, okay, and so they take 3, 4, 5 days, after the 5th day they feel better, so then they come back to work, then that stops that leave. They can't go back and forth, in that situation. But they could take the remaining 5 days for another qualifying reason. So let's say they took the 5 days for themselves, but then a month, 2 months goes by, and suddenly somebody else is sick, right? Maybe they're sick again. Maybe they got to take care of their child because the school is still closed or whatever the case may be. They still have that time, okay? They just can't go back and forth, Monday off, Tuesday off, then come back in Wednesday, Thursday, you know what I'm saying? Unless, of course, it's under the special circumstance with that school closure. So now let's talk about documentation. Documentation is going to be vital. The documentation is going to, 1, protect your company in the event that there's a lawsuit brought up against your company for failure to comply with the law. 2, though, it's going to provide the required documents that you need to give to be able to obtain those tax credits. And we'll talk a little bit more about the tax credits in a little bit. So documentation, while nobody wants to do it, it does need to get done. You are to document the following. It says the name of the employee requesting the leave, the date or dates on which the leave is requested, the reason for the leave, and a statement from the employee that he or she is unable to work because of that reason. A couple other bullet points. It says if your employee requests leave due to a government order, you want to get the name of the government entity that is issued that order. You want to keep that documented. Or if they are being requesting leave because they are required to self-quarantine based off of the advice of a healthcare provider, you want to document the name of that healthcare provider. If your employee requests leave because they need to care for their son or daughter, because of the COVID-related closure of the school or daycare or other care sources, you want to document the names of the children being cared for. You want to document the name, place of care, or the name of the individual who is the caretaker. And then you want to have a statement from the employee that states that there's no other available person to care for that child. We do provide a template for you guys. You're not required to use it, but it is there for you if you choose to. All right, let's go into a few other additional considerations. Now, this is going to be for my really small businesses. Really small businesses are going to be 50 or less employees, and they're going to be exempt from certain paid sick leave and expanded family and medical leave requirements. Okay? You're going to be exempt if providing the employee such leave would jeopardize the viability of the business as an ongoing concern. All right? So if you feel that providing this amount of leave to an employee would jeopardize the business, you do have an exemption. Now, that exemption is going to be limited again to businesses with 50 or less employees, and documentation is going to be vital. Vital, okay? It says a small business, 50 or less employees, is exempt from mandated paid sick leave or expanded family and medical leave requirements only if the leave is requested because the child's school or place of care is closed, or a child care provider is not available due to COVID-19 related issues, and an authorized officer of the business has determined that at least one of the three conditions are satisfied. So we've got a couple parts that we need to meet here. Number one, the only exemption that we'd have to be able to claim if we're a small business is under the request for leave related to taking care of a son or daughter because of those closures. Okay? And then we have to have the other part, says, and an authorized officer of the business has determined that at least one of the three conditions are satisfied. Those three conditions state the provision of paid sick leave or expanded family and medical leave would result in the small business's expenses and financial obligations to exceed the available business revenues and cause the business to cease operating at a minimal capacity. So if paying out all this leave is going to basically put you out of business, you don't need to pay it. Okay? The absence of the employee or employees requesting paid sick leave or expanded family and medical leave would entail a substantial risk to the financial health or operational capabilities of the small business because of their specialized skills, knowledge of the business, or responsibilities. Or there are not enough sufficient workers who are able, willing, and qualified and who will be available at the time and place needed to perform the labor or services provided by the employee or employees requesting paid sick leave or expanded family medical leave. And these labor or services are needed for the small business to operate at minimal capacity. If you're going to deny leave based off of this, you need to document. Document. You want to document the reason why you denied leave. You would also want to provide some sort of backup documentation to support that position. Because if there's a lawsuit, then you're going to need to have that to defend yourself. Okay? So let's just briefly go over the penalties for noncompliance. Violations of the paid sick leave provision will be a violation of Section 6 of the Fair Labor and Standards Act and will be considered to have failed to pay minimum wages. So you would be in violation of the FLSA, failure to pay minimum wages. It would be subject to penalties described in Sections 16 and 17 of the FLSA. Employees also may be able to sue the employer if the state and local law permits. There are some state and local laws that don't permit that, but if they do permit it, then those employees may actually privately sue the employer. All right, let's just do a quick review over our tax credits. First, we need to determine eligibility. The eligible employers are going to be entitled to receive a credit in the full amount of their required sick leave and family leave, plus related health plan expenses and the employer's share of Medicare tax on that leave. This is going to be through April 1st to December 31st. Of course, that's when the FFCRA came into play. The refundable credit, though, is applied against certain employer taxes on wages paid to all employees. So basically, if you provide this leave because you're mandated to do so, you're going to be able to take those tax credits. And those tax credits are going to be up into the amount that was discussed, those caps, right? So we saw the two different caps. We've got, $511 a day for the self-care under the paid sick leave, or we've got $200 a day for taking care of somebody else or any of those other qualifying reasons under the paid sick leave, or if they're taking it under the expanded family medical emergency leave. This is an extremely important note. You are not required to provide leave if materials sufficient to support the applicable tax credits have not been provided. So if we have an employee that comes to us and says, hey, I'm going to be taking my paid sick leave under the FFCA because my healthcare provider said that I am needing to self-quarantine, and you say, perfect, I'm going to go ahead and need some sort of document stating that. I'm going to need the name of that provider. And they say, oh, I'm not going to provide that. You don't need to approve that leave. Okay? You still can, but you don't need to, because you may not be able to receive the tax credits without that proper documentation. So you can still, as a company, you can still do that just as a company, as being generous and things like that. But you have to be mindful that if you don't have the documentation to back up that request, back it up, you may not be receiving those tax credits on that back end. All right, you guys, so I know that was a little bit of a down and dirty overview of the Act. There's still a lot of questions. There's still a lot of things that are unknown on how things are going to be enforced, especially in circumstances where there's not a lot of clarity. And for some companies, there's a lot of, well, we could do this or we could do that. And in those circumstances, it is advisable to seek professional legal advice or professional accounting advice, depending on which provision you guys are looking at. The enforcement, the way that this is going to go forward, because it's so new, it hasn't really been established. I know that the DOL did put in place that they would not enforce up through April 17th, but they would retroactively go back to April 1st for any violations that occurred. So that seemed a little weird to me. Who knows really what this may turn into as far as a lasting standard or lasting requirements that employers are going to have to follow. As I stated prior to, this is the first time in American history that the federal government has required paid leave from the employers. Paid leave from the employers, and that is monumental. That is historic in itself. You may see this, even though this provision is going to sunset at the end of the year, you may see it, and it would be advisable to consider that it may actually never go away fully. Okay? It may be a step that they take to open up that door where paid leave would be a requirement for us under maybe FLSA. Okay? Just some things to think about. That is definitely not something that has been pushed out yet, but it's just something that I like to advise on so that we're prepared for it as we plan for the future as employers and those things that need to be required. Okay? There are some documents here that are provided. You can click on the links to these documents if you open this slideshow in PDF, and that has been provided for you. So if you open up your notes to print, open them up in Adobe, you can click on the different boxes there and it'll take you directly to those resource links. Okay? If you have any issues with that, go ahead and let us know and I'll send you the links via email. Okay? Last couple things, this is just going to be for those employers that could consider to be really close to that 500 threshold, right? There's a lot here. You guys can go ahead and read over that. That is directly from the DOL website. But what it's basically stating is that when you're counting up to the 500 employees, that it's going to be however many employees you had on the day that the leave started, okay? So whatever that leave date was, that's going to be when you start counting your employees. Your employees are going to be considered anybody who is employed with a company. So that could be full-time, part-time, seasonal, temporary, day laborers, any of those provisions. There's also information, again, you guys can read about organizations that would be considered a joint organization. So if you are part of a larger corporation and you guys are all kind of umbrellaed together under one, you may have to consider all the employees from all the little companies to that 500 threshold or for that 500 threshold, okay? That could work in your favor because if you're over that 500 amount, then you don't need to comply with the FFCRA, okay? So those are just certain things to look at. If you're very close to this threshold, if you're thinking, wow, well, we could, some days we're at 490, some days we're at 510, and we just kind of fluctuate, you really do want to then take a look at the company internally, at your policies of maybe setting your own threshold and saying, okay, just to ensure that we are never out of compliance, maybe we're going to say, 450 or something like that. And you can do that. There's nothing that says you can't do that. It's just really important that you guys are understanding that you want to be in compliance with this because the penalties, the lawsuits that can come out of this are going to be potentially huge, okay? And then here's that healthcare exemption. I'm not going to read this whole thing here. Basically, it's anybody who's considered a healthcare provider or who works for a healthcare provider in any sort of doctor's office, dentist, hospital, clinic, urgent care, anything like that. It also includes our auxiliary services that are providing support to those offices. Also includes those that are providing medical supplies and things like that as well. Or medical equipment, I should say. So this healthcare exemption, it is there, and if you qualify for that, that means that you do not have to pay leave to your employees under it.